So in this video, we're going to talk about one-step and two-step equations. And my main purpose is to really focus on fractions, okay? So first of all, we talked about in the last video working backwards with your order of operations. So like in number 1, we want to undo the adding. So to undo adding, we're going to subtract 12 on both sides. So you get m equals -2. It doesn't matter whether the variable's on the left or the right hand side. However, I find the best tip is to always have your variable on the right hand side, because as soon as we do inequalities, we have the inequality arrow trick where the variable has to be on the right side so that the inequality actually points like an arrow which way you solve or which way you graph. Okay, otherwise it doesn't work. So the variable, I'm just going to rewrite this as g minus 9 equals -2. And to undo the subtracting, I'm going to add 9 to both sides, so we get g equals 7. Okay, so for number 3, 7y, well, we know that's multiplication, and to -7y, that's multiplication, so we go ahead and undo the multiplication by dividing by -7, and then you get y equals a positive 13. Sorry, I had to think for a second. And again, I want you to get really comfortable with fractions, so when you see them, you think, okay, yeah, they may be a little extra work, but it's not a big deal. Like, for example, in number 4, a over 9, well, we know a fraction is division. Well, the opposite of division is multiplying, so instead of dividing by 9, we're going to multiply both sides by 9. Now the side with the fraction, we're just going to write it as 9 over 1, so we know the numerator divides out with the denominator, and you get a equals, well, -4 times 9 is -36. Now, I actually don't mind fractions because they're actually easier than decimals in my opinion. In fact, when you get rid of a fraction multiplied by the variable, you multiply by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. Well, right away on the variable side, the 3's divide out and the 2's divide out, so we have just plain x. And just remember that anytime you have a whole number times a fraction, you put the whole number over 1. And I actually prefer doing any division before I do any multiplication, because I'd rather like divide to get smaller numbers so I don't have big numbers that I have to divide in the end. So 2 goes into 10 5 times, and I just multiply the numerator, and the denominator is just 1, so I'm not even going to worry about the denominators, and I'm just going to get the whole number 15. Okay? So I'm going to have you do 6 and 8 on your own, but if you look at number 7, the reciprocal of -6/5 is going to be -5/6. You got to keep the sign the same. So again, a negative times a negative will give you the positive k, and then the 5's and the 6's divide out. And then on the other side, I just put the 12 over 1. And again, like I said before, I always do the division first, because I like to break down numbers so I can multiply smaller numbers. So 6 goes into 12 twice, and then I just multiply 2 times -5 is -10, and I don't need to worry about the denominator because it's both 1, so I know I have a whole number answer. Okay, so I'm going to have you do 6 and 8 on your own. Now, the two-step equations, and we kind of covered this in the last video, so I'm just going to do a few. Always undo the adding and subtracting first. So here we're going to subtract 8 on both sides. So we get 6x equals 42, and then divide by 6, and x is 7. Okay. If you're not comfortable with the variable on the left-hand side, I'm going to go ahead, you can just flip it and interchange both sides, so you have -4x plus 9 equals 13, because basically if you flip an equal sign, it's still an equal sign. And then if you undo the addition, you subtract the 9 on both sides, and you get -4x equals 4, and then you undo the multiplication by dividing by -4, so that you get x equals -1 because a positive divided by negative is negative. Okay, so let's tackle, actually I want to do number 14. Let's just rewrite it. I'm going to put it over here so that the variable x over -5 plus 8 is on the right hand side equals 11. That's just what I prefer. It's easier. So then first we undo the addition. We subtract 8 on both sides. So we have x over -5 equals 3. And when we look at the x over -5, remember I said with fractions, I just want you to read it as division. So when you're undoing division, you actually do multiplication. So we're going to multiply by -5 on both sides, but on the fraction side, I'm just going to put it as over 1. And then we know -5 divided by -5 is just positive 1x, but we just write x. And then 3 times -5 is your -15. Okay, so that was number 14. Now let's look at 15. Again, always undo the adding or subtracting first. So since we're adding 22, let's subtract 22. So we get 3/5 x equals 6. And then anytime we have a fraction times a variable, all we do is worry about the reciprocal. This is the biggest key that you need to remember from here on out all through the rest of your math classes, okay? So we're going to multiply by 5/3, 5/3 on both sides. And we know on the variable side, the 5's divide out and the 3's divide out, so we get 1x, or just x. And then on the right-hand side, I'm going to put the 6 over 1. I do the division first because I like to break down the numbers so they're smaller, because I like to multiply smaller numbers, not bigger numbers. So 3 goes into 6 twice, and then 2 times 5 is 10, and I don't need, both denominators are 1, so I know it's a whole number, okay? So go ahead and do 6 through 16 and 13, because we did 14 already, because we know that x is -15, and then check the answer key at the end of the video.